So that's the slow and easy method, the sheet mulch method, and it really is flexible with just the materials that you have around. So just finding something that's going to break down. The medium method, I guess I call it the medium method, is to get out the rototiller or borrow or rent a rototiller. So rototillers seem really easy and fast. You know, you just fire it up and go to town. But you have to keep in mind that the grasses, most of the lawns we have are perennial grasses that want to keep growing. So when you rototill the first time, you're chewing up this grass layer on top, but you're not killing the grass. You're chewing it up, you're mixing it with some of the topsoil below, but that grass didn't actually go anywhere. And so the next time it gets wet, it's going to start growing again. So the reason I call this the medium method is because it's physically easy to just run the rototiller. You let the fossil fuels do some of the work for you, but it does take a lot of time still because you can't do it in one fell swoop. So what I do if I am going to use the rototiller, and rototillers do make sense, especially if your garden is pretty big. The larger your garden area gets, the more help you're going to want from machinery. So with the rototiller, what I do is I get the soil to a good moisture for tilling, rototill, kind of shallowly. At first, you're not going to be able to get very deep into a lawn with a rototiller. And then get it wet again, encourage it to regrow, and then till it again. Getting a bow rake like this, bow or soil rake, these are my favorite kind. And you just move it in back and forth motions pretty parallel to the surface of the soil. And that'll sort out some of the bigger chunks of turf that, so instead of just leaving them in there to regrow, you can try to pull some of them out at each step. But the rototiller method it'll take multiple times to get to a point where when you plant your garden next, it doesn't just turn back into lawn. If those chunks of roots still have a good amount of soil around them, they will eventually break down. But in order to get something as solid as grass roots, a bunch of grass roots to break down and eventually turn into something usable again, what I like to do is take that pile of grass roots or sod and keep it moist and cover it with a tarp. So it's moist underneath, so it's capable of breaking down, but it's covered with a tarp so it doesn't just try to regrow. That really comes into play, what to do with what you've pulled out really comes into play if you do the fast and hard method, which really takes a lot of energy, which is more than what a lot of people want to do, but it's actually peeling off the turf. So this is my favorite tool for it. This is called an iHoe, really useful tool. It's just a heavy-duty hoe. And you can actually scrape under the turf and find where the roots meet the topsoil, where there's less concentration of roots underneath. You actually get under it and peel it back, piece by piece. And so you'll still delineate your garden area, and then you can go along the edges of that delineated area and just start peeling the turf away from the soil below. And it's a sweaty job. It takes some effort. But if you use a hoe like this to just peel back the sod, underneath is plantable soil. You get plantable soil pretty much right away. I said there were sort of 3.5 methods. The other method is making a raised bed. So in that case, you're not really doing anything specifically to the turf underneath except smothering it. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of the soils that we have around us. I think a lot of them, people talk about how hard they are and how clayey they are. A lot of our soils are really quite good, but there are some good reasons to say, forget it, I'm not going to use the soil I have, I'm going to bring in soil and make a raised bed. So there are some really good reasons to do that. And so if you are going to do that, the first thing I recommend doing is doing something to smother what's underneath the raised bed. So kind of maybe a more organic approach would be to still use a sheet mulch type setup, but without the straw. Really just a whole bunch of cardboard might be what to use first before you start piling on the topsoil and potting soil that you fill your garden bed with. What you make the raised bed out of is really kind of a factor of just what you have around. But there are a couple things to keep in mind. Raised beds made out of wooden boards can be an attractor to sow bugs. Sow bugs like to break down decomposing wood. They like to eat decomposing wood, but if they're eating decomposing wood near your new seedlings, they'll also eat your seedlings and eat holes in strawberries. So I have seen problems with raised beds made out of wood attracting sow bugs that then cause problems in the garden beds. If you make them out of some kind of stones or blocks, it's important to try to think about the cracks in between the stones and blocks, because those cracks in between are where slugs and snails especially, like to live. Oh, I guess one more thing about raised beds. I really recommend using a lot of topsoil to backfill your raised bed with. I've seen a lot of raised beds just filled with potting soil, but potting soil is mostly organic matter. It's mostly peat moss or cocoa peat. It doesn't actually have any soil in it. And the minerals in the soil are going to be a sort of a long-term source and storage of nutrients for your plants. So I really recommend backfilling raised beds with mostly topsoil, maybe 80% topsoil, and only 20 or maybe 30% potting soil. It's going to provide a longer-term source of nutrients for your plants, and I find that plants are generally healthier actually growing in mostly soil. So, the only real downside to that is that when you buy topsoil from somewhere, chances are there's going to be some perennial weeds that want to grow out of it. So you are going to have to deal with the weeds that were in that topsoil. If you use just potting soil, it doesn't have any of that, but I just don't think it grows healthy plants year after year either.